It's good day to brew, baby. What is up, YouTube? It's your boy Millsy, back with Hometown Commander, back for another episode of Millsy Brews, the show where I brew my version 1.0 deck instead of the commander in front of us on my quest out brew the magic room. You know the motto, baby. It's ABB, always be brewing, and that's what we're back to do today. The deck list is going to be down in the description for you below. So I'd really appreciate it if you do all those YouTube things, like, comment, subscribe. I'd appreciate it. But today, we're continuing Transformers Week, and we're talking about Blaster Combat DJ, a 5-mana Gruul Transformer. On the front side, he has a more than meets your eye for 3 mana. It says other non-token artifact creatures and vehicles you control have modular 1, so they either enter with an additional counter on them. So they enter with an additional counter on them, and then when they die, they can put their counters on another target artifact creature. And whenever one or more counters go on Blaster, you get to convert it to the backside. On the backside, it has modular 3, so it's going to come in with 3 counters on it. And then you can pay X to move X counters from Blaster onto another target artifact. That artifact gets haste till end of turn, and then if it has no counters on it, we convert it back. Blaster, I think, is a really interesting idea for Commander. Kind of taking that Gruul modified idea and caring about artifacts. I think the backside's fun, giving a creature haste. And the cool part is you don't have to use all of Blaster's counters to give a creature haste, right? Just moving one gives it haste, allows us to kind of get our creatures in there and get it involved. And then when it runs out of them, it flips over, allowing those creatures to come in with counters on them. And then, whenever you get a counter on it, you can get it back over to its backside. So we're going to care about things we want to put counters on or that already come in with counters. We'll talk about how we can just get more counters on our permanents in general, just to make sure that they're all modified even if we can't use Blaster's ability. And then we'll talk about some counters matter support just to better protect our creatures with counters and get more value out of them having counters on them. I want to say a quick thank you to my channel members. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. If you're interested in paying just $1 a month to get access to all the videos early, check it out down below the video. But all right. Well, there's already creatures with modified. This is kind of an interesting way to make sure we have creatures that already come in with counters on them. Arcbound Crusher is a 4-mana modular 1 that says whenever another artifact comes in, you put a counter on it and has trample. So not a bad target to get growing. The Overseer comes in with 6 counters on it. So beginning your upkeep, you can put a counter on each creature with modular you control. Kind of fun. Remember that the Blaster on the front side will give those creatures modular. So Overseer will see that and spread the counters. Reclaimer says we can remove a counter from it to put an artifact card from our graveyard on top of our library. Great ability, to get some key things back, especially if they die. The Slith puts counter on itself whenever it deals damage, so not a bad thing there. Cradle Clearcutter is an example of a creature that is going to be good because it's going to help you tap for mana. It adds an amount of green mana to its power, whether we put it down for 3 mana as a 1/3 or 6 mana as a 3/6. Blaster can help, Clearcutter started adding us a bunch of mana. Crystalline Crawler comes in with a 1/1 counter on it for each color spent to cast it, which is going to be at maximum 2 in our deck, I guess, more potentially, but most time it's going to be 2. You can remove a counter from a data mana of a color, and you could tap it to put a counter on it. So a growing threat that can also be used for mana. Giggling Skitterspike is another great threat. Whenever it attacks, blocks, or becomes the target of a spell, it deals damage equal to power to each opponent, and then we can make it monstrous. A great thing to put counters on is it becomes a bigger threat, attacks, and deals out damage. Marketback Walker is a nice Hydra and a construct, that can come in with counters on it, from its ability. You can put counters on it, all that, but when it dies, you draw cards for each counter on it, which is a really nice ability if you think about it, allowing you to take a Marketback Walker and try to sacrifice it to something else or do something with it to draw some cards. Mindless Automaton comes in with a couple counters on it. You can pitch a card to put a counter on it, but you can actually remove counters from it to draw cards. A huge ability that we can use to our advantage, especially if we have a ton of counters running around. Patchwork Automaton gets bigger every time we cast an artifact spell and has ward 2. Stonecoil Serpent is a nice X-Spell creature that comes in with reach and trample and protection from multicolored. Going to help with a little bit of removal that can target it, and make it a little bit more resilient. The Transplanter says whenever it or a equipped creature attacks, you get an amount of green mana equal to its power. We don't lose that mana as steps in phases end until end of turn, and we can actually attach it to something else. I like the Transpander because it could turn creatures into a way to get some mana to play some more things. I think there's a lot of ways to take advantage of that burst of mana for us. Threefold Thunderhawk comes in with a couple counters on it, but whenever it attacks, we get a bunch of gnomes equal to its power, and so those gnomes can become big threats, especially since they'll be able to come in and allow us to have a go-wide threat. And then you could sack another artifact and put a counter on it. But again, Blaster can also put counters on it to get more of those gnomes. The Twitching Doll is a great mana dork, tapping itself to put a counter on it, a nest counter on it. But we can also sack Twitching Doll to make a spider token for each counter on it, which also will counter a +1/+1 counter. So it's a nice way to not only get mana, but in the mid to late game, kind of crack it and get a bunch of spiders right from it. Verdurous Gearhulk comes in and puts 4 +1/+1 counters among any number of target creatures we control, right? And it's got that nice 4/4 trample body to be grown with counters. But all right, how do we put more counters on our things? Well, you have things like Grumgully. It's going to say that each other non-human creature we control enters with another counter on it. Kami Whisper Hopes says if one or more counters would be put on a permanent we control, we put that many +1 on it instead. And then the Kami taps for its power, so it's a great thing, right, for Blaster to put counters onto to get more and more mana. Seal Overseer can tap every turn to put a counter on each artifact creature we control, which is going to be a lot of our deck. Ozolith, very similar to the Kami. If a counter would be put on an artifact or creature we control, that many +1, you could tap it to put a counter on something. Recon Craft Theta is a great vehicle in our deck, as whenever it attacks, we proliferate, meaning counters are going to be put on everything that already has a counter, growing our whole board at the same time. Truth and Justice, very similar. Whenever the equipped creature hits a player, you put a counter on a creature you control and then proliferate. Nice, because you get to add that counter maybe to something that doesn't have it, and then proliferate, making sure they get on all of them. Velocipede is going to make sure that every creature at least comes in with a counter on it. If it's 4 or less, it gets just 1 counter. If it's 4 or more, it's going to get 3 additional counters on it. And then the Velocipede is not going to be a bad threat if we could crew it. Branching Evolution doubles the amount of counters that we put on something. Hardened Scales has that same ability when talking about adding additional ones. So just ways to affect how many counters are going on to something. Master Chef says as long as it and Blaster are out, that commander creatures we control have whenever this creature enters the battlefield with an additional counter on it. So Blaster comes in with an extra, and other creatures we control enter the battlefield with an additional counter on them. And then Rhythm of the Wild has that ride ability to give them a choice of a +1/+1 counter or haste when they come in. Again, works great with Modular, because Modular can have them come in with a counter, and Rhythm can have them come in with haste. Or you can just have them come in with 2 counters, right, and take the turn off, or use Blaster's ability to give them haste. Right? There's a lot of ways to kind of interact with that. But as far as the counterings mattering, I mean, there's a lot of ways to take advantage of this. Zhang can give them all the ability to tap for a mana of any color when they have a counter on them, and can -1 itself to put counters on things. District Mascot can remove counters from itself to destroy artifacts, which is an interesting way to do it, and then it can kind of grow with those counters. Animation Module says whenever you put a counter on a permanent we control, we could pay 1. If we do, we make a servo. Which is kind of fun, allowing us to, again, continue to go wide and threaten our opponents that way. Locke's Artillery says that if at the beginning of our end step there are 30 or more counters among artifacts we control, it'll deal 10 damage to each of our opponents. Kind of a fun way to pay off all of these counters coming in, and it adds on to that Sunburst, so each artifact creature comes in with a counter on it for each color of mana spent to cast it, hopefully going to make sure we get counters onto our things. The Ozolith can take the counters of creatures that leave the battlefield, and at the start of combat we can put them on a creature of our choice, potentially really souping up a creature and making it a big threat. OLB1 says whenever we put 1 or more counters on a permanent or player, it deals that much damage to a target opponent, creature an opponent controls, or planeswalker an opponent controls. So every time these counters are going on, damage is going to get pinged out with OLB1 to really hurt our opponents. Innkeeper's Talon gets to pass out a counter at the start of each of our combats. At level 2, we can give all of our permanents with counters on them ward 1. And then we get to level 3, it has that branching evolution ability to double the amount of counters that would be put on things. Invigorating Hot Spring is probably one of my favorites to pair alongside that modular ability, because it just says modified creatures we control have haste. So anything with a counter on it has haste, meaning that modular is going to mean that all of our artifact creatures come in with haste. And that's really helpful. And then Hot Spring comes in with 4 +1/+1 counters on it, and you can move the counters from Hot Spring once per turn to effectively give a creature haste, right, and get them involved. And then Uncivil Unrest packs the Riot just like Rhythm of the Wild, but it says if a creature we control with a +1/+1 counter would deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals double that damage instead. So you can see, you get the counters on our things with either the modular or other ways, and just get into combat and have some fun. But I've said it before on the show, and I'll say it again, no deck's ever complete. This is my version 1.0 shot at Blaster. And getting into brewing, there was a couple of cards I really wanted to put in the deck, but just due to their cost, I couldn't get them in there. The main one being Bristly Bill. I just love the idea of handing out those lands, handing out those counters, number lands coming, and then paying 5 just to double all of our counters. Bristly Bill just unfortunately is not a cheap card. And when we're trying to brew on a budget, it takes a lot to justify Bristly Bill. It's kind of the same with the Ozolith. You know, it sits at a pretty high cost, and if there's any one card, if you just up the budget by $30 or $40, it would be Bristly Bill just to come in. I think when you have it out, it's just going to be such a nice ability. The Ravager is interesting. I think it works really well with Blaster because you could sacrifice those artifacts that have modular to put their counters on, you know, something else and put a counter on the Ravager. I wasn't sure because of its cost if it really made sense in the slots it was in, and I'm sure Argates could be made for that. And then Quilled Greatworm, I love the look of. Whenever a creature we control deals damage, you know, combat damage to an opponent during our turn, we put that many counters on it. Just a great way to get counters onto our creatures that are dealing damage, and we can get it back. I think Greatworm would probably be one on second thought I would probably bring right back in right away. But let's get into our playtest. Remember, the goal of our playtest is not to find magical Christmas land, but it is to go through our game plan and see how we can set up our our hands in a to practice environment. Here we're keeping a 4-lander with Cradle, Clearcutter, Untethered Express, and Thunderfolks. Remember, 5 mana on the front side gives all your things modular 1. 3 mana on the back side gives you the Boombox, right, that can start passing out counters, right, to give our things haste. So I think it's good to kind of look at our hand and see, okay, what makes the most sense for where we're at. Here in Deter 2, I think it's just the Highland Force. We see the Sword of Truth and Justice, so there's our way to potentially proliferate. Turn 3, we see a Skitter Spike. Okay. So I think what makes the most sense to me here is to put Blaster in on its backside. Get 3 counters on it. This can potentially get us some counters on things like Skitter Spike or Thunderhulk in the future. This turn, I think we're going to end up having to... I can't crew the Untethered Express. I could give Skitter Spike haste, but I don't know if that's my favorite at the moment. I think I like the Clearcutter. Paying the 3 for it, and then bounce for the Gruul Turf just to give us some more mana next turn. And then we can't tap Blaster because we just don't have the mana yet, but we can on a future turn just to keep getting Cradle Cutter, right? More and more power. So here we're at 5 mana plus 1 from the Clearcutter. If I put 1 into Blaster to tap it to move a counter over, then it goes up to 6 mana, right? So I kind of like the idea of that. Give the Clearcutter what haste and an extra counter on it. So you got 6 mana. I like the Skitter Spike. I like the Sword of Truth and Justice. I like leaving up Beast Within for some removal. The truth is, I think there's just a lot of different ways you can go. The Untethered Express could be a nice target for Blaster if we got it to its front side, but I think I like the Skitter Spike. And unfortunately, I've already used my counter this turn for the Clearcutter. So it probably would have made more sense if I was going to play the Skitter Spike to not and have used the Skitter Spike. But this is why we do this. This is why we learn what we need to do for it there, right? And then that gets us into the next turn, where now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right, from the Clearcutter. I think I like the Thunderhulk. Thunderhulk comes in with 3 counters on it. And I can't pay to give the Thunderhulk haste with Blaster, but I think we can still attack with the Skitter Spike, right? Get some damage in this turn. And then, when that Thunderhulk comes in, I apologize, it makes the gnomes on enter, which is great, because then we can use them to block if need be. Now on this turn, thinking sword plus attach. I could flip it back over by moving the 2 counters. If I want to, that would allow the modular to turn back on. So this is 5 to equip the, like, we could put this on Thunderhulk, move the 2 counters to him, and then when he attacks, now he's a 7/7 with pro white and blue. If we get a free attack, take it. Otherwise, just attack. And it's going to make 7 more gnomes, right? And then if it deals damage, it's going to get a counter and proliferate, right? Sorry, we would probably put the counter, I would imagine, on Skitter Spike, right, instead of it. Keep making Skitter Spike a threat. But again, now we have these, right, this gnome thing engine. We got a bunch of those that can now become threats, right? And then on the next turn, there's the Inventor Sphere, can go help search or something. Duretti could have us start drawing some cards, digging even further. But again, I like the idea of maybe even just monstrousing the Skitter Spike here. Get attacking with it. You could even move the Truth and Justice over to it. Make it even bigger so that when it attacks, and I think we're not in a bad shape there. Playtest number 2. Keep it a 2-lander with Farseek, Soul Ring. There's the Skitter Spike again, Uncivil Unrest, and the Gear Hulk. So we don't got a bad start. I mean, the Soul Ring is going to help us. We can go. I think it's just Cinderglade turn 1, because you can turn 2 Mountain into the Soul Ring into the Farseek. Here we see Mountain. March of the World Ooze. My thought here was then it turns all your creatures into 6/6s, right? Makes those counters way more effective. I just realized I cannot go get a forest. I have to go get a dual land. So we're looking for either Cinderglade or like Wooded Ridgeline here. Now we're looking great on our next turn to continue to just have more mana. I like Ovia, which is a way to give ourselves trample and also a way to put down things. I like the idea of Uncivil Unrest to start giving things counters when they come in. We don't need to be rushing out our things. Do I take another turn to set up? Do I get things in? Like we play the Arcane Sting, I've got 4 mana. We could just play the Rhythm, start getting double Riot, is my thought here. Again, we're at a bracket 2 deck, so people are going to still be still be building, right? Now we're untapping with 6 mana. I can get Blaster in on the backside. 3 counters. Right, so I could use them this turn if I want to. But if I do him, all right, I have nothing to play. I could get Skitter Spike down with, my thought is 2 counters. Right, don't necessarily need to attack this turn. Just get him the counters set up for our next turn. Now with 6 mana, we could set up Ovia, actually tap it this turn to put Gear Hulk or Thunder Hulk in from our hand. Right, so Ovia gets 1 counter, and then haste with the Rhythm, put down the Thunder Hulk, which would come in with 3 counters, but we will have it come in with, I guess, 4 in haste. Ovia has it come in with 2 counters on it if it's an artifact. So we're making 6 gnomes on enter, and then right when it attacks this turn, it's getting right 2 more or 6 more, or yeah, right when it attacks this turn, it's making 6 more gnomes, right? And then now you have those Uncivil Unrest, right? Things really mattering for Skitter Spike and Thunder Hulk, right? When it's dealing extra damage, especially with Skitter Spike's ability. And then come back to our turn. Now I think something like March makes the most sense. Turn this into a 8/8, turn this into a 12/12, and just continually, right, push that advantage as we, keep going towards the mid to late game. But we'll get into playtest number 3. Keeping a 3-lander with Kadama's Reach, the Velocipede, Recon, Craft Theta, and Weatherlight. So a lot of vehicles in this hand. A lot of really interesting starts. There's the Ozolith, so that's not a bad thing to start setting up. We're just 1 turn off Cultivate and Kadama's Reach, so not much we can do here on turn 2. Turn 3, I think I really want to ramp and then set up something right a little bit better next turn. So I think I'm just going to go get a mountain, and then we'll put another mountain into hand just to start evening out our colors. Turn 4 here, put the game trail in, so we're at 5 mana. Blaster could come in on the front side this turn if we want to start setting up those counters for all of these vehicles coming in. If we want to. We could also do Velocipede plus like animation module. But I kind of like getting Blaster in on the front side, start preparing for these things with modular coming in. It's now turn 6. I've got 6 mana. I like Theta because it can start proliferating. We could do like Velocipede, comes in with a counter. Animation module. I guess you could do the module first, then the Velocipede. When the Velocipede comes in and gets a counter with Blaster, it's going to trigger animation module. We could pay to get a servo, and then that servo comes in with a counter on it because of the Velocipede. It is a token, so it's not going to get the modular from Blaster, but let's say, okay, I think this makes more sense, right? Because now we're getting more of these counters set up on the battlefield. Maybe then this turn it would be the better time for the Theta. It's mana value 4 or less, so it's just going to get a counter. But it's also going to get the modular. It's going to make the alien. The alien's going to come in with a counter on it because of Theta. It doesn't get anything from Blaster, but it will get something from Velocipede. So now it'll be able to crew, right, the Theta to start proliferating. We can crew the Velocipede with Blaster if we want to, so we could start attacking. Right? But really, we're just continuing to build our board, right? Crew the Velocipede with Blaster, and then play the Uprising, which is going to draw us a card. 4 mana left this turn. I mean, we could get the Weatherlight in. Get the Weatherlight in. Start having some options for starting to dig through our library, crew up the Theta, have it attack, proliferate, and now we're just off to the races. Getting more counters on our things. If any of them die, we put the counters on Blaster, and it flips over to start passing counters out. But I think otherwise, we're doing kind of what we want in getting these vehicles in with counters and doing what we kind of want to do. We have the Fangs to double up on those counters. Stock the Party could be used to remove counters to draw cards if we want to. I mean, we have lots of options now where we're sitting at. But let me know, what do you think of Blaster down in the comment section below. Remember, we're targeting bracket 2, so nothing too fancy, but going to fit right in with some other decks in that tier. But let me know what you think, and I will catch you all in the next one.